Okay, we'll go ahead and get started, everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Masters Conference webinar series. Today's webinar is being recorded. And today's topic is working collaboratively to measure, report, and improve law firm diversity. I will now pass this along to today's moderator, Maureen O'Neill.
Thanks, Bruce. And thanks everyone for being with us today. My name is Maureen O'Neill. I am Senior Vice President for Strategic Client Experience here at Consilio, where I also have the privilege of serving as our Diversity and Inclusion Officer. I'm excited to be with you today, where I'm going to be supporting my colleague, Doug Ventola, who's going to be taking the lead in moderating today's discussion. I am confident that it is going to be informative and engaging and thought-provoking, because we're going to be talking about a subject that is, top of mind for so many folks in the legal space right now, and that is analyzing, measuring, reporting out on, and ultimately improving the diversity in our law firms. I encourage the attendees to ask questions along the way. Please use the Q&A button in the Zoom dashboard. I'll be keeping an eye on the questions coming in, and I'll pose those to the group. And now I'm honored to introduce my colleague, Doug Ventola. Doug is a managing director with Consilio's Law Department Management Group. Doug leads our work with Sky Analytics, which is a legal spend benchmarking and analysis tool that aggregates a company's outside legal spend into an easy to understand platform. And Doug has been instrumental in developing the capabilities in Sky Analytics to include the tracking and analysis and reporting on diversity metrics. Doug was actually a co-founder and the president of Sky Analytics, which became part of the Consilio family of companies in early 2015. Prior to forming Sky Analytics, Doug was a senior vice president at NASDAQ, where he launched and led their global corporate services division. So with that, Doug, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Maureen. And I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists for today, all of whom I've worked with Sky Analytics, assisting them in the measurement and reporting of their diversity of their outside counsel. First, we have Ed Blakemore, who's Assistant General Counsel, Litigation for Rockwell Automation, which is a Fortune 500 industrial manufacturer. In his role at Rockwell, Ed has direct responsibility for the management of all product liability, commercial, environmental, and toxic tort litigation. Also joining us is Vanessa Losey, who's AVP at Flagstar Bank. At Flagstar, Vanessa manages all the department's legal technology and works closely with the Deputy General Counsel regarding legal operations. She is the technical liaison between the legal and IT departments as well. Vanessa is also a leader in the company's D&I initiative, currently serving as chairperson of the LGBTQ Employee Resource Group, previously serving as the vice chair. We also have Heather Blanco. Heather is a corporate attorney specializing in the regulation and documentation of complex financial transactions. She's currently senior counsel to Bridgewater Associates, a premier asset management firm. At Bridgewater, Heather serves on the Legal and Regulatory Group's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, working to increase D&I both within this practice group and among the vendors that Bridgewater uses. And also joining us is Shannon Stevens. Shannon has over 20 years of legal and insurance industry experience and is currently manager at Markel in the Claims Vendor Management Office. Her team is responsible for the review of all legal invoices for Markel Claims and manages Markel Claims Panel Counsel. Shannon is also a member of the Markel Claims Diversity and Inclusion Steering Committee. So I'd like to thank our panelists, and we will get right into the subject matter for today. For diversity inclusion, my observation was when Resolution 113 of the American Bar Association was released 4 or 5 years ago, I really saw an enhanced interest from the corporate law departments that I work with at Consilio in the measurement of their outside counsel diversity. With Resolution 113, the ABA urged all providers of legal services, including law firms and corporations, to expand and create opportunities at all levels of responsibility for diverse attorneys. But it also urged the clients to assist in the facilitation of opportunities for diverse attorneys. And many companies signed up to the resolution, vowing to support Resolution 113 and to work with their their outside counsel to promote diversity. For our panelists, when did your law department really start focusing on the diversity of your outside counsel? Maybe Heather, you can comment on that.
Sure. So as Doug explained, I work for an asset manager. So the law department at my company is probably a bit smaller than some of my peers. Just to give you guys an example, when we did do the polling of our law firms, we talked to fewer than 20 law firms. And I imagine that some of the other panelists who will speak talk to far, far more law firms. So we're sort of a taker in the D&I ideas, and they sort of filter down from the top at my firm. And so in 2018, our CEO made D&I a focus for all departments. And we, as the law department, got together and said, how can we support this overall effort? And at the same time, we got hooked up with Doug and heard his ideas about what sort of peer firms were doing. And so from sort of 2018 to 2019, we began to poll our vendors and gather diversity and inclusion information about them. And so although our work sort of happened at the same time as Resolution 113, it wasn't the triggering factor that brought us into the D&I as a whole.
How about you, Ed? Was Resolution 113 a catalyst at Rockwell, or how did that play out or influence Rockwell?
Sure, Doug. I mean, I'd say it was just one of many things. Certainly Rockwell's already doing some of the measuring. I think we've continued to try and amplify and build on our program year over year. But I think it's part of what we were certainly signatories and all that. But I think we already had some. I think much like Heather, already some efforts underway, and we're evaluating firms, and this was just one of the many things that helped in our decision calculus.
Sure. And Vanessa at Flagstar, any particular catalyst that prompted Flagstar to focus more on the diversity and inclusion of your outside counsel?
Yeah, I think for us, the biggest driver was the overall diversity, equity, and inclusion program that Flagstar stood up about the same time Heather was mentioning, around 2018. And we began to become proactive as a legal department, thinking how we can contribute to the overall initiative. So this was certainly also a consideration, but I think what the bank was trying to do as a whole was a bigger driver and gave us the weight behind what we needed to actually go in and start gathering the data and information and looking at things a little closer.
Yeah, excellent. And that makes sense. And I hear that a lot from the companies I work with, where there's an overall focus from the corporate level that then kind of permeates the organization, and eventually you all start looking at your outside vendors, your law firms, et cetera, and kind of making sure that they're in sync with your own corporate objectives. This next slide here is just a little bit of an excerpt from our most recent law department, ours being Consilio's most recent law department operations survey, and just highlighting the fact that 56% of respondents to the survey have or plan to have a diversity program within the next 3 years. Frankly, I'm a little bit surprised that it is only 56%, but some of that is also a function of the size of the companies responding to the survey. So smaller law departments may not yet have that on their radar screen, but certainly mid to larger size corporate law departments are increasingly focusing on developing D&I programs. As far as your own program and the development of that, Ed, how do you see that developing going forward?
I think it's just going to become more rigorous over time. I mean, at the end of the day, what we've seen is that the efforts by corporate counsel and corporations to date have been, I think, woefully inadequate to diversify their, I say in large part, because there are certainly folks that are getting really good results. But I think, it's certainly statistics have shown that the overall progress of these initiatives haven't moved the needle in a remarkable way. And so I think from our perspective, it's going to be continuing to add. It's just like any other corporate goal. If you happen to hit it, then there's going to be addition to it and more rigor added to it because you're getting good results. And I think that'll certainly be the case with Rockwell Automation this fiscal year.
Sure. How about you, Shannon? How do you see the program continuing to develop at Markel?
So I would echo what Ed said. I think that we started a formal diversity program in 2019 as far as company-wide, and in claims, one of our focuses is on our vendors. So we're broadening who we're including in the group of vendors. Last year, our focus was legal vendors. We're next going to focus on independent adjusters. So we're calling it a journey because our company certainly has a lot more work to do ourselves, and we're trying not to hold our vendors to a higher standard than we hold ourselves. So we're really viewing it as a journey both for ourselves and for our business partners.
Right, and that makes sense too. It's the proverbial you can't boil the ocean. So kind of I see it often as a progression with the companies that I work with. This is interesting. This is recent. This next slide here kind of speaks to some recent press that Coca-Cola General Counsel received regarding their position on diversity as it relates to their outside counsel, which is very progressive and very specific or structured in their expectations from their outside counsel. For Coca-Cola itself, 30% of associate and partner time on new matters must come from diverse lawyers, and 50% of which should go to Black lawyers. That in and of itself is interesting to me because first of all, they're setting a very specific goal for their firm, so which I think is important in the firm's understanding what the actual expectations are. But it's actually also the first time that I've seen a specific percentage expectation within their kind of diverse attorney time that should go to a group within the overall group. So that 50% going to Black lawyers. So they have very clear objectives there. If the firms can't meet diversity commitments internally, they can work with other firms to assemble qualifying teams. So that gives options to the firms on how they can actually achieve the objectives of Coca-Cola. There are consequences, fee reductions for non-compliance over 2 quarterly reviews, no consideration for new work if non-compliance continues over time, and the compliance is required for preferred panel consideration. And then lastly, kind of setting longer term goals within their expectations, that minimum diversity commitment will increase over time with an ultimate goal of 50% of time billed by diverse lawyers. So way more progressive than what I've seen, at least with the companies that I've been working with. What do you think? I'll start with Shannon. What do you think about Coca-Cola's approach?
I think it's a really interesting and bold approach. And I think that other companies should look at modeling after what Coke is doing if you can. And I think one of our struggles with Markel is because we're an insurance company, a lot of the counsel, the majority of the counsel that we're retaining are not actually, Markel is not their client. We have an insured who's a client. And so I think there's some issues around having very specific requirements and having penalties associated with not meeting those requirements. to the extent it's our, insured counsel. As a company itself, I think Markel can hire counsel using some of these concepts and have those requirements when we are in fact the client. So we're looking at this, considering this, and I think, one of the things we are looking to do is find out where we're at right now, which is part of what we're working with Sky and Doug on, is to figure out where we're at and then set goals for progression. And, just as an aside, when I first heard Koch's plan, it struck me that this is probably a death knell for smaller firms. As somebody who was a sole practitioner briefly, I think that, there'd be difficulty in meeting some of these requirements, and, forcing the firms to, affiliate with another firm is the next step to them being acquired by those firms. So I do have a concern about what impact this would have on smaller firms and just continue the growth of the BMS national firms. And I don't know if that's in everyone's best interest.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, Shannon, because as you started speaking, that same issue occurred, was kind of floating around in my head, let's say, where it may not be practical for law firms below a certain size to actually meet these objectives. So, so for corporate law departments that are dealing with smaller firms, they certainly need to factor that into their considerations and set appropriate expectations there. Vanessa, what are your thoughts about Coca-Cola's approach?
Yeah, I think that we were, like Shannon said, kind of taken back a little bit by this approach to the points that you both made. While my general counsel does like the idea of putting some type of measurements in place or some benchmarking to track progress over time, both of what you said is very relevant for us because we have firms in non-diverse locations, a lot related to mortgage litigation that could be in a small city where it's just not possible, or to your point, Shannon, sole practitioners. So I don't think we could take an all-in approach like this. It would have to be something, maybe by firm size or geographic location or both, but we certainly are looking towards the future of offering some type of incentives and probably some penalties as well, related to, progress over time. But this is not a one size fits all approach, depending on the industry that you're in and, what type of firms that you engage with.
Yeah, agreed.
There's a question that's come in from one of the attendees. It's around this notion of setting very specific numerical goals. And the question is around whether there's any concern over the lawfulness of that. So do any of the panelists want to explain why there's not such a concern?
I'll make a quick comment on it. I'm with the companies that I've been working with, I've never seen anything that would that has been challenged as being unlawful. But also with a lot of the expectations and the requirements from corporate law departments, as well as some of the certifications that are out there, the language is typically around a certain percentage of diverse attorneys being considered for certain positions versus actually being the people, being the final person to be on this. So there's two ways of looking at it. One is consideration, so that everybody's, given a fair chance at opportunity, and that we make sure that a certain amount of opportunity is presented to diverse attorneys. And the other part of it is who's actually doing the work. But I'm going to let any of the panelists comment on it. I've never seen it questioned from a lawfulness perspective.
Yeah, and Doug, I'll just chime in as well. I'm not aware of any of these initiatives, and one of our other attendees also referred back to Rick Palmore back in 1999, who had started another of one of these many initiatives that have gone and have occurred. And so I'm not aware of any of them ever being challenged. I think firms have to adapt. And so, to one point about smaller firms, one of the issues that Coach GC and others, including Rockwell, do is we have a specific goal for our use of MBE, WBE law firms. And so that addresses some of that smaller firm, because those tend to be smaller firms in one city. But we've gotten fantastic results by leveraging NAMWolf. I would encourage people to think about that as well, just for a variety of reasons. Rate structure, really great representation. I've gotten two or three or four dismissals this year just using some of my NAMWolf stable of firms. And so I encourage folks to think about it that way, but also that, again, when you even think back to the signatories to the Palmore Agreement, a lot of them, the movement hasn't been what we would like. And so I think, and we also have to keep in mind that different companies are at different stages. Some companies, unfortunately, are still at like what I call the Rainbow Coalition, where, hey, this fantastic, cadre of people, super diverse, comes in and does a pitch for you and say, yeah, okay, that looks like the kind of people I want to send business to. And then some companies are just starting to look at the bill to kind of determine who is actually doing the work. I saw the Rainbow Coalition, but who actually got the work? And then there are other companies that are setting goals around, okay, I know where I am and I know where we want to be, because maybe we want our, it's certainly nice, the idea that people who, buy our products actually match the kinds of people who are retaining for outside counsel. So I think everybody's at their own spectrum. I suspect Coke is probably using a whole lot of law firms and probably has already messaged some of these things already and maybe not seen the progress that they thought was appropriate. And so I think that's probably why you see a letter like this. I wouldn't recommend a letter like this, certainly from a company that doesn't even know, for example, has a leveraged Sky and doesn't even know what their diversity is. And so I think that is the first step. But then, of course, setting goals, and just like any other corporate thing, I mean, when there's a corporate supply chain goal of, X amount of, whatever that goal might be. I don't know about everybody else's company, but they tend to increase those goals year after year. It's just kind of the nature of the business. And so diversity really should be no different. And so I think folks need to really be thinking about what's the best way to implement change, keeping in mind as well, one final point is that most companies, mine included, include women in the diverse category because women are historically underrepresented as well. And so, so even if you happen to be in a locale where maybe there are almost no minorities at all, women is included in the category. And I'd also encourage folks to think about pipeline programs that almost every bar association sponsors these days that deal with underrepresented folks. And then you can partner with them and or your clients to provide some kind of arrangement where you can develop your own talent. So don't feel as though, hey, I'm in X location, there's no way for me to find anybody. Number one, there probably is. And then number two, think about the partnerships that you can develop to actually create the diverse workforce that your clients are demanding.
One kind of add-on question to what you were just talking about, Ed. You've mentioned moving the needle a couple of times as you've been talking. Is there anything specifically you do at Rockwell to encourage compliance or work towards that needle movement that you're referring to?
Well, again, at Rockwell, and it was the same way when I was at Eden years ago, we report out on progress. And so I, on a quarterly basis, report out on progress to our goals, and it's treated just like other goals. And so, that helps. The fact that we've got an MBE, WBE goal, as well as a goal for diverse people in majority firms, I think helps as well, because again, MBE, WBEs are stellar, but sometimes you need scale in a variety of other locations. And so really, I think it's that, and I think it's being intentional about it. So, if you tell your client, your law firm, your vendor that you'd like more diversity, and they don't provide you with that diversity, then there are a lot of other vendors out there, number one. And then you can also be intentional and kind of say, because just about every law firm these days is on the web. I can't think of one that isn't. And you can actually look on their website, see who their legal professionals are, and make some suggestions about diverse teams that could do your work. I've done that many times, and I've never had, no one's ever turned me down on my suggestion. So again, just some strategies about intentionality, and that's how you move the needle. Because again, a lot of people have signed letters, a lot of people have put out statements, but a lot of people have not, said, hey, guess what? These are our requirements. We really want you to do more here. And here's how we're willing to partner with you to help you accomplish that task.
Yeah, excellent. This is just speaking a little bit about benefits of law firm diversity. So some of these, I'm sure you're aware of, some of these might be maybe a little bit insightful, but some of them include a more diverse workforce, bringing different ideas and perspectives to the table, a diverse workplace tending to be a happier workplace, which can impact productivity and reducing turnover. Diverse law firms tend to have a larger referral network, which certainly can benefit you. Diversity can also provide a courtroom advantage as it relates to relatability between your lawyers and the jury. Diverse legal teams send a message to your employees that diversity is a core value of the company. So it's kind of that expanding beyond the corporate objectives and kind of casting that net wider out to the vendors, the law firms, et cetera, that you're working with. And then also promoting diversity and inclusion creates a positive impact on your external perception. Shannon, what are some of the benefits that you may have seen either internally or externally as a result of programs focused on enhancing outside counsel diversity?
Well, I would definitely say the benefits that we have listed here, we've definitely seen. As far as internally, I think that a benefit of it is that it did force the company to look at themselves, for the very reason that I said before, that you can't really hold someone to a higher standard than you hold yourself. So I think it has really, in concert with the events of 2020, including social justice movements, we were already on our diversity journey, but that really turned up the focus as a benefit of everything that went on last year. And so I think that's been the biggest benefit, has been more of an awareness of the issue, and then that we looked at ourselves more closely. And just real quickly, I wanted to mention, when we were asking about aware of any legal challenge to like the Coke policy, not aware of any legal challenges, but our concern as an insurance carrier is potential bad faith litigation. If we have, sort of required, diversity and inclusion goals to meet, that it's absolutely required and you can't be on our panel unless you meet them, that's problematic. But the way that we're, in addition to what Ed said, what we're doing to encourage our counsel is positive reinforcement by recognizing our firms that are doing really great things in the D&I space, and advertising it to the rest of our panel firms. So I think, like I said, all of the benefits that you have listed here as far as outside counsel, the benefits I think are very true and huge drivers in why we're doing what we're doing, aside from the fact that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Excellent. Right. Just Doug, just to briefly build on Shannon's point, which I think is a stellar one that I forgot to mention, is you certainly need to be communicating with your outside counsel on a regularized basis. At Rockwell, we have an evaluation form that includes diversity and a lot of other metrics that we evaluate our outside counsel on at minimum every year. And so that's a great opportunity to have those discussions and candidly to partner with them. So there are, we have not yet done this, but there are other corporate clients that I know who have partnered and actually said, hey, why don't we go in and split a new law clerk? Why don't we split a summer law clerk? We'll let them be seconded here at our office for a few weeks. They'll be at your office. And that incentivizes that firm to really think of that person as valuable, hire that person, then that person is starting to work directly with those and has developed those relationships that are really unique. And so I think, again, looking for strategic ways to partner with, whether you're the law firm or whether you're the corporate client, are the ways to actually, again, to move the needle in a more impactful way. Another way is to, whether you're at a law firm or whether you're in a corporation, is to hire great people who happen to be diverse, because sometimes that serves as a role model for other folks who may be downstream. So while I do not say anything bad about pipeline programs starting with 20-year-old people, another really impactful way is to hire people at director and vice president levels. And they then will tend to bring in, as they get hiring authority, diverse people, and voila, you've got a more diverse environment. So it's really just, look again, just a smidge of intentionality will get you a long way in this world.
Excellent. And I think what I'm also hearing, that's kind of an underlying both, Ed, what you're describing and what Shannon described, is collaboration and communication is an important part of this process, where you're basically facilitating or assisting the law firms in achieving those goals through your own advice, counsel, or collaboration with them, which of course is a recipe for success here. There's also an operational maturity model as it relates to diversity. So for corporate law departments that perhaps don't have a D&I program in place and are in the process of putting one in place, there's typically a progression, but it's not necessarily any one of these boxes of this spectrum. Most companies don't conform neatly within these boxes, but it's certainly a process where, from a diversity perspective, basic program would be diversity not being tracked or it's not a priority within the organization, and basic from the maturity level of the actual law department. And this could be very small or brand new law departments where typically diversity is not the primary focus. That's not number one. You may just be, struggling with getting your business going. You might have other priorities. And so diversity can end up taking a back burner in those situations. Intermediate levels, corporate law departments requiring firms to provide an annual diversity statement to the department, so you get a sense of, from the firm perspective, what they look like, and also beginning the collection of diversity data from the firm, whether it's firm level or timekeeper level data. And then more advanced law departments as it relates to legal ops in general and diversity measurement, provisioning of additional diversity data, both firm and client-driven data points, and active assignment and staffing practices with accompanying reward and additional work from the department. So Coca-Cola, for example, would fall into that box based upon my understanding of their requirements. Where do you see your department falling on the maturity model, Vanessa? How does Flagstar kind of fit into these boxes?
Yeah, I think you made a great point in saying sometimes you don't neatly fit into any one of the boxes. I would say we are intermediate, trending towards advanced. We just started our program a couple years ago, and I think we've made significant progress. We are firming up our outside counsel manual with a stronger diversity statement. We're going to be sending a letter out to our firms this year, advising them, I think to your earlier point about expectations, and we explain why we're doing this, that it's a bank-wide initiative, and that we hold ourselves to the same standards, and explain kind of the diversity within the legal department and the bank as a whole. We've collected timekeeper data, we've collected firm minority data, and shameful plug here to Sky, we're leveraging Sky to take a deeper look at that, to your point, and getting more advanced. What does a more formal plan look like? What are some rewards? Are we going to possibly have penalties? And looking, as Ed said, to that change over time. Do we look at it quarterly? Do we look at it annually? to actually see that we're moving the needle or affecting the change that we're looking for. So we're kind of straddling the line, I think.
Sure. Ed, how about from the Rockwell perspective? How do you see Rockwell kind of fitting into this maturity model?
I'd probably classify us as advanced, but you know, I wouldn't want anyone to rest on their laurels. So there's still things we're tweaking and doing to try and again move the needle even further. But yeah, I'd classify us as advanced. We're capturing. We already have the data. We're wrapping it around with evaluations. We're trying to drive additional accountability, and we're looking for. We're trying to also be mindful of what are the ways that we can help to incentivize firms to help us on this journey. But I would classify us as advanced.
Yeah, and excellent. And you both are kind of making excellent points as well. It's a journey, and so even Coca-Cola, who had those very progressive expectations and clear expectations that would put them more into that advanced box as well. I don't expect that they're done. It's not pencils down. We put out this policy and now we're done. I'm sure that they will continue to refine their expectations, to refine their programs and over time. And so once you kind of achieve some of these, it doesn't mean that there's not more to continue working towards. It is.
And Doug, just to build off of that, I'd recommend that the people who are on the line who are corporate counsel look at this as continuing to refine. To me, it's no different than if you set a goal that, hey, I want to lose 30 pounds or something by X date. Well, at some point you have to get on the scale. We can have all these platitudes and everything. At some point, the scale tells no lies. And so, and so it requires, because we're starting at a point, keep in mind that many women and underrepresented minorities didn't really have a meaningful opportunity to participate even at having a seat at the table more than 40 or 50 years ago at most. And so it's going to, that the result of that is where we are today. And so in order to make a meaningful change on that, it's going to require some hard work by a lot of people to really be impactful. And so I really encourage everybody, whether you're a law firm partner or associate or whatever, or whether you're a corporate counsel of any iteration, to really think about how can you help? Because I think, a lot of corporate counsel have direct hiring decisions in terms of the outside counsel that they leverage and can make those decisions with some amount of autonomy. And so it really begs the question of, if you're prepared to help institute the change, then again, are you, we have to continue to be intentional and continue to move the needle up just like we do every other corporate goal that's significant.
Excellent. Agreed. So these are, when thinking about D&I as it relates to your outside counsel, there's a few different areas to look at. One is timekeeper level diversity attributes, those underrepresented groups. Others are firm level designations. This slide here is focused on the timekeeper level attributes, where primary attributes that companies, the law departments I work with, will look at first are things like gender and race. So how much of their work is going towards female timekeepers or racially diverse timekeepers, and evolving secondary attributes such as disability status, LGBTQ+, as well as veteran status. And these secondary attributes are ones that are sometimes, but not always, tracked by your outside counsel, by your outside law firms, and or sometimes, but not always, reported by the attorneys and other support staff within a law firm. Shannon, let me ask you, are you tracking timekeeper level diversity demographics? And if so, which ones? Are you focused on the primary, the secondary, or both?
So we are attempting to track diversity attributes, and another plug for Sky, working closely with Sky to actually send out an updated survey to our panel council asking for this information. And it's both the primary attributes and the secondary attributes. We're trying to be as inclusive in our definition of diversity as we can, and as it evolves over time, update it. I would say we're also tracking, or we're interested in tracking gender identity. And then also something that I learned from my co-panelist, Heather Blanco, at another presentation that we did, so trying to capture something related to socioeconomic status. So we're also interested in asking a question like, are you the first generation in your family to go to college? Another thought is to ask, are you the first generation in your family to be a US citizen? To try to capture some kind of socioeconomic factor into the demographic information that we're seeking. But we are also tracking and plan to track not only what is that demographic information, but then who are the people that are actually doing the work on our matters. I think Ed said the Rainbow Coalition comes in and then they don't work on the file. And I've personally experienced where I've been trotted out for client meetings and then I never worked on it. So we're trying to track to make sure that the firms are putting their money where their mouth is. So definitely tracking demographics is one of the ways that we're trying to account for diversity and inclusion.
Sure, excellent. And I agree. I mean, measurement certainly, and I think Ed, you also made the point that if you don't even understand what your diversity profile looks like for the attorneys who are currently working on your matters, it's difficult to set expectations.
Yes.
And so here's some of the firm level designations that I see more and more corporate law departments considering. One is Mansfield certification, which is a diversity lab, runs that certification program, where 30% of women attorneys of color, LGBTQ+, and disabled attorneys are considered for leadership and governance role, equity partner promotions, formal client pitch opportunities, and senior lateral positions. And this is one of those areas where that question about, I mentioned in the answer to the question about lawfulness, where the wording here is specifically about being considered for the positions. Also, NAMWOLF membership, which is the National Association of Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms that Ed alluded to earlier, looking at minority-owned law firms, women-owned law firms, or MBEs and WBEs, as well as LGBTQ-owned law firms. And then there are what I call the evolving considerations. And Shannon just alluded to this in what she was describing as well for the socioeconomic considerations. But Human Rights Campaign, for example, the Corporate Equality Index, and considering that as it relates to your outside counsel, evolving socioeconomic considerations, first in family to attend college, are you the first generation American? Some of the ones that Shannon mentioned. Age demographics, I know that's something that is being thought about. I think one of our panelists in our preparatory discussions mentioned that as well, and kind of what that age spectrum looks like at the law firm, and are certain age groups properly represented. And then also kind of new this year is the mid-size Mansfield rule, with Mansfield certification was more geared towards very large law firms, and now they have this kind of revised rule, which is for law firms with less than 150 attorneys, that they're currently piloting with 20 law firms. So there are no mid-sized Mansfield rule certified law firms at this point in time, but there are 20 that are in the applied process for that rule. And if that works out well, then of course that will be expanded also. As far as these evolving considerations, are any of these things that you look for? I'll let Shannon, you kind of touched on a little bit of this, but I'll let you expand on that if there's anything else regarding the evolving considerations.
Yeah, and we are tracking the certifications that you mentioned. And again, we're advertising the fact that we're tracking these certifications to our panel law firms. And that was actually our first focus last year, was trying to identify the certifications we wanted to track and then get that information from our firms. And part of that was because these designations are difficult to get, and they're independently verifying the information. So a lot of the work is done for you if a firm has one of these designations or certifications, of knowing that this is a true demonstrated commitment to diversity if they have one of these, because they're not easy. And then I would say on the evolving considerations, the age one is one that we're also trying to take into consideration, whether it's, you know, people newly starting out on their careers, because if we don't train the next generation who's going to try our cases in 10 years, but then there's also the aging population, which, you know, it's great if a firm has women working on cases, but if they all get fired after they turn 45, that's not great. So we're also looking at tracking that kind of information as well.
Yeah, excellent points. And you used you used two words that I like, and they're really important here, which is demonstrated commitment. You know, some of these certifications, certainly things like Mansfield Rule, are very rigorous process to go through from a certification perspective. So just applying shows a certain level of commitment by outside counsel. So collectively, these give you a lot of different things to look at. And certainly as it relates to the practicality of some of these things for smaller firms, you know, Ed alluded earlier to MBE, WBE law firms as being kind of another way of using law firms that might be on the smaller side, that obviously get underrepresented groups involved in the work that's being performed for you. The data collection process, and I'm gonna move fairly quickly through the next few slides, just in the interest of time. I want to make sure we have a couple of minutes at least at the end to answer any questions. But the diversity data collection process, corporate law departments that I work with are looking, you know, collecting the data typically in two different ways. One is either they're requiring their law firms to provide the data when a new timekeeper is added to a matter or set up in their system. So it's through an e-billing platform typically. Or they're going out and they're periodically collecting the demographic data. So it might be through Excel-based templates where outreach is done to the outside counsel to collect timekeeper level data. And then the diversity can be tracked by firm. And so when we talk about tracking diversity by firm, I think this is responsive to some of the points that Ed made, or a point Ed made earlier about really kind of having a sense or really understanding what that diversity profile footprint looks like of your firm as it relates to the attorneys that are working for you. So when looking at firm level diversity details like this, I'll kind of throw a question out I'll start with Ed actually, because I mentioned him. Do you track and compare diversity at the firm level? So kind of benchmarking your firms against each other and understanding what that looks like.
Yes. I mean, the reporting that we get through Sky allows me very easily to, you know, for example, we focus on the firms that end up being about our top 20 spend usually, and gives me a good slice to kind of know this firm, this is how this firm's doing. And you try and think about it when you're looking at it from an analytical perspective. If you may not want to compare your 25th firm with your first firm, because maybe they had got 6 more matters than the other firm. So it's kind of up to corporate counsel or their staff to kind of make sure there's an apples to apples comparison. But certainly, as I look at how different firms are performing and report that out to stakeholders, we do some benchmarking, kind of see how are other firms doing it, how are they how is your firm, for example, that comes back with 66% of diversity on their 3 matters? How does it compare with another firm that got 3 matters and came back with 15% diversity? So, and are there ways to incentivize and work with those firms to help them on their numbers? We also, during those evaluations, we do talk to firms about how their scores came out. And, I think that's another part that some corporate counsel don't leverage enough, which is I have yet to meet a law firm that I've hired, a lawyer at a law firm that I hired who didn't want feedback. And 20 plus years of doing this, every lawyer wants feedback. And so I think cascading that feedback is one easy way to kind of create some accountability relative to these kinds of metrics, as well as other metrics that you may be trying to track. But, so I'd really encourage people to think about, get the data, compare it, and then think about your messaging with your outside counsel or vendors.
And an excellent point that you're making there that I'll highlight as well is you mentioned, and really kind of focusing when you're looking at this, focusing on your top 20 firms, which that's another important consideration. It's not practical to perhaps collect and track the data from every firm you might be using. I have clients I work with who might use hundreds of firms, and a firm that did 3 hours worth of work for you in the last 12 months, it's probably not worth your time or their time to even make the effort to understand what the diversity profile of that 3 hours looks like. So kind of focusing on your heaviest, most utilized law firms first, that's going to give you a good sense of, for the majority of the spend where it's going. I have some clients who apply the 80-20 rule. I want to know where if I focus on my top firms, I'm going to cover 80% of my spend. And that's good enough for where we are at this point in time. As far as tracking in comparing diversity data at the firm level, I'll ask Heather, are you doing that? And if so, how and when do you actually leverage this data?
Yeah, we are doing that. So like Vanessa, we think that we're in the intermediate model. We're not quite as good as Ed's team. We're not incentivizing yet. We're just trying to track and figure out where we are. So how we did this is first we got senior buy-in from our chief legal officer. And we asked her to reach out to all of the firms where we spent the most money because we thought that message would be most impactful coming from her, was sort of the relationship person inside CC. We asked all of our firms to fill out a modified ABA survey because we thought that they should already have that information on hand. If you go to websites, you can see that there's already a commitment to diversity stated on many of these firms' sites. And so we thought that that would be an easier ask for them. But though we did ask the questions that Shannon had mentioned earlier around socioeconomic diversity, because we were trying to find one other sort of plane at which we could evaluate diversity at the firms. So we went out with questions about race, gender, socioeconomic diversity. And we also went out with questions about firm culture because we knew that there would be some firms that were less diverse than they wanted to be. So if they had sort of programs in place that showed that they at least cared about D&I and were trying to improve over the long run, we thought that could speak well for them as well as the actual numbers they had in place today. So we had our chief legal officer send out the email. She asked all the firms to go to a website. They filled out a scorecard showing their diversity efforts across the sort of metrics that I described. And then we use that to create a diversity scorecard that our attorneys can look at internally. So the idea is if you're going to be setting up counsel for a complex matter, if you need to bring diversity of thought to bear on a question that you think is going to be complex and difficult, you now have a way to see which firms are likely to bring diversity of thinking to the table. We hope to get to a place where we're more Ed-like or more Coca-Cola-like, where we can actually use that scorecard to incentivize firms, but that's going to be something that we do probably over a 2-year horizon. And we also intend to get this information from firms at least every year so that we can see where they're moving annually, whether it's a positive trajectory, a flat line, or something more dire.
So, and just kind of continuing one kind of follow-up on that, Heather, when you're looking at kind of measuring the diversity, does position matter? Is that something that you consider? Because you can have a firm and X percentage of your hours may be coming from racially diverse or female timekeepers, but if that's all coming from paralegals and associates, and you see nothing at the partner level, is that something that also is considered?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're trying to make sure that not just your partners are diverse, but your equity partners are diverse. Those questions are important to us because when we looked at the data, and I'm sure that all the panelists have looked at the data as well, you can see that the pipeline's actually quite diverse. Like people who are coming out of law school are diverse, but then when you get up to the partner levels, that diversity has evaporated. And so we're collecting that data. We want to partner more with firms that actually have diverse leadership structures, not just diverse junior associate. So thank you, Doug, for pointing that out. We think that's an important point to track.
Excellent. And as we're getting closer to the top of the hour, I'm going to skip ahead a couple of slides because there is, this is kind of the last speaking slide, but I wanted to make sure that we got to this, which is really talking about operationalizing diversity initiatives. So, you know, what can be done practically to encourage or promote diversity from your outside counsel? And some of those initiatives include incorporating expectations into outside counsel guidelines, leveraging diversity data as a foundation for law firm discussion, so communication and collaboration, considering diversity data during the law firm selection process, considering diversity data for preferred panel consideration. And certainly that's some of what we saw from Coca-Cola and what the kind of what the information that they're putting out there. Understanding firm D&I programs and plans to improve if needed. So what are your firms actually doing? What are the programs in place? And directionally, where are they going? And then setting D&I themed personal goals so that D&I becomes a natural part of your own thought process. In talking specifically about the first point, outside counsel guidelines, I'm going to ask Ed, do you actually have specific guidelines in your outside counsel guidelines around D&I expectations?
Yes. I mean, we evaluate outside counsel on a variety of metrics, and one of those boxes happens to be diversity, and it outlines, and we make this public, so it's not like it's a surprise or anything. So we in our retention letter, we make it very clear that we're looking for diversity, and we let people know what is in our evaluation form ahead of time. And so it has a variety of things related to diversity that are one of the categories that we measure people on. And that's something that's, at least for us, it's a forward-facing document, but it's two-way street. So it's accountability on us to kind of be reinforcing and giving you the feedback, and then we provide the feedback, and we keep that year over year so we can track, hey, we evaluated you like this in 2018, now it's 2019, now it's 2020. Are we seeing progress or not? And that goes into our decisions relative to, you know, retention. And Doug, I don't want to take up too much time, but I do see we got a couple of different questions. One around just kind of what do you do if people are, I think Peter Bennett ruined in about kind of what do you do if you've had, you know, diverse folks who have left your firm. I'll just chime in. I'm sure my other panelists probably have some thoughts too. Is number one, I would certainly recommend doing a interview, an exit interview, and I would also do a stay interview. So exit interview for the people who leave. Why are you leaving? It could be something as simple as you're in this locale and somebody wants to move to Los Angeles because that's where their family are. Okay, we get that. But if it's other things, you know, firm needs to be evaluating that. And then the people who do stay who are diverse, why are they staying? How can I amplify those things? Do more of that. How can I, and then as well, keep in mind that most of your clients would be glad to partner with you on something if you asked or suggested. So if you say, hey, I see, you know, Markel, you really value diversity and we really are thinking about things differently. And so, you know, can we partner with you on A, B, or C? I bet Markel would say, hey, it's an interesting idea. Let's talk about that. And so don't be afraid to talk to your clients about these initiatives because, again, if you diversify your staff and we leverage those people, everybody wins.
Excellent. Agreed. Are there any, I know we're hitting the top of the hour. Maureen, are there any other questions that may have come in?
There were a couple of questions and comments that hit on a common theme, so maybe we just take a minute to address that, and that is around privacy considerations with both collecting the information in the first instance and then also sharing it externally outside your firm, with your clients. So does the panel want to address how you've gotten around those concerns and handled this type of collection lawfully?
Sure, I'll comment quickly on that just based from a Sky Analytics perspective, because we've assisted really many corporate law departments, including I believe all of our panelists here, in the collection of such data. The data that we're collecting is generally reported by the law firms at the timekeeper level, but it's self-reported data that the law firm basically has permission to share. If a law firm doesn't have such permission, they won't share that data. And so then maybe there's other considerations that come into play, such as law firm level designations or reported data through tools like the ABA Model Diversity Survey. So there are other considerations if you are not, if your law firm is not able or willing to, for legal reasons, to share that data with you. And actually, I'll mention one more thing too. With the work that we've done assisting corporate law departments, we have at Consilio have focused on U.S.-based attorneys and U.S.-based timekeepers of law firms because of the complexity of privacy laws outside the U.S. That's actually an area that we have to date not got involved with.
And Doug, I would say this is why it's problematic to only have demographics be a cutoff point, because there's a whole host of reasons why a firm may not have completely accurate demographic information. So I think it's important that it only be a part of what you're looking at, and that you consider other things like the things that we've talked about today.
Excellent. Any other?
Just one final comment, I think, is that, it's only as good as the data that is reported. So certainly we can understand the sensitivity that might be associated with someone sharing that they're LGBTQ or something like that. But I also would say, and that's one of the reasons why the Corporate Equality Index, we've applied from, I think I've done like 10 years in a row, and other firms and things have done that too. But if people are not comfortable enough to be themselves at work to kind of share these basic things, that also tells me something about that work environment. So, if there are, for example, a whole lot of LGBTQ people but don't feel comfortable enough to kind of share that, that could be an indicator of that environment. So I just encourage, again, everybody continue to look at these things and then operationalize them into goals. Because I think that's how you actually, when you have to report out on a goal and you have a goal, amazingly, people kind of marshal the resources to get the goal done.
Excellent point. Any other final questions, or Maureen, or comments from the panelists?
I think we addressed them all. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, I know we ran a couple of minutes over, but I appreciate everyone who listened in to today's webinar. As much as I talk with all of our panelists on a regular basis, I learn something else every time I speak with them. So I found this to be very informative. I really enjoyed this today, and I hope everybody who joined and listened in today found it informative as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks much. Have a good day.
Thank you.